just very quick, I will not bother you too long with this because it will be quite some repetition of things that have already been said.
And we are thirsty.
And people are really thirsty. So if you remember one of the last slides that Ulrich showed, we have the different work packages, and one of the work packages is this IoT security by design. And it's also in the title, and I will say a few words about this as well. So, but just who am I? I'm definitely I'm following up this project from KU Leuven side. I'm part of the research of COSIC. Why doesn't it work? Okay. So for people who don't know COSIC, so COSIC is a research group of KU Leuven specialized in cryptography. So we have a bit more than 100 researchers in our group, and we're, I would say, really one of the world-leading groups in cryptography. So this is an old group picture, but every time you take a group picture, a few days later, it's very outdated again. Because with 100 people, there's a lot of going in and out. But so what I just want to give a quick outlook is, as the project is still ongoing, what are some topics that will still be addressed related to IoT security by design? And there are quite a few, but the 4 ones I want to mention is threat modeling, is authentication, and then I also want to mention 2 projects, Trusty project and IIoTSBOM projects, which are 2 projects in Flanders, which have some relation with what's happening here. And typically projects are not in isolation, so I want to make the link to this project. They can be interesting as well. And so these things will be discussed more in detail in the next years in workshops and more technical sessions. So first of all, threat modeling, and this I was very happy to see that many people address this in their presentation. And so if we use SBOMs, if we know that there is a certain vulnerability, the next question is, of course, what's next? So you're not going to do an SBOM and then say, thank you, although I just heard that people in the hospitals put it in a shelf, but in practice, if you know that there is, you have certain vulnerability, you want to do something. And that sort of fits into the general process of risk assessment, risk and threat assessment, is that you sort of need to know, okay, if there's a vulnerability, do I even care? Is this something that's extremely critical that I immediately have to address, or is this even something I should not bother about? And so important questions is, okay, the specific vulnerability, can it really be exploited to a real attack? And if there's a certain vulnerability in a specific component, how does it affect the rest of my system, the other components? Is it something isolated, or will it spread out, and will it also affect other parts of my system? If there is a certain attack, what will be the damage? What will be the impact, the overall impact? And so to do this, as most of you probably know, you need sort of to do regularly a systematic risk and threat assessment. So you have to know, okay, how does my system look like? And if there is a vulnerability here, what happens? What are the things I should worry about, and what should be the things I'm not be too worried about? And of course, this is not something new. This already exists. So there are even standards, like the quite known ones are the NIST one for critical infrastructure, or the ISO 27005, part of the ISO 27K series, which is specifically related to risk and threat assessments. And also, for example, if you look to the risk, the NIST framework, the cybersecurity framework, there is this, one of these 5 domains is identifying, and it's really a specific part of this, of these controls that are defined there. And if you look at risk and threat modeling, there are multiple sort of well-established methodologies. And so my view of this is that not one is necessarily better than the other one. It are just different ways of doing sort of the same exercise. In the end, if you do risk and threat assessment, it's sort of, it's maybe a bit dangerous to phrase it like this, but it's sort of a guided brainstorming. It's sort of, it are methodologies to help you, to guide you in reasoning about the security of your system. So, for example, some very well-known ones in the industry are things like Stride or using attack trees. And so this is something, if you think about IoT security, this is something important to consider. That this, if you have a certain IoT system, an industrial system, threat modeling is really an exercise you have to do. And in many domains, in many security domains, this is well quite established, but not always the case. So in some domains, it's still less being used, and that's something I think that this project can help in. While, by example, if you look at the safety domain, there are some sort of similar concepts, and they are probably more established over there. So this is, I think, one important topic that has to be addressed. The second one is authentication. Authentication, I think that typically, if you think, okay, what are security goals you need? Often people say, you need the CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And the integrity, the actual correct word from security people is actually authentication, what you need. But then it would be CAA, so that sounds less nice. But so if you think about authentication, it's really something that appears a lot. So it could be if you have a certain system and somebody wants to do remote maintenance, you need authentication. You need to know, is this person who's applying remote operation on your system, is this person allowed to do it? Who is this person? You also need, for example, for if you deploy software updates. Again, you have vulnerability, you want to apply patches, you want to know that what you're applying is valid, is it legitimate, that it's not being malware that actually is being installed. Also, if devices in your system, typically in IoT system, you have multiple devices that are communicating, you need device-to-device communication. And if you take one step back, if you say authentication, you could say, okay, authentication, what do I need? I need some cryptographic algorithms like digital signatures or message authentication codes and keys, and problem solved. So why I'm still mentioning this? Because in IoT systems, it's often not so trivial. And I can give many reasons why this can become quite tricky in practice. A few examples are, for example, if you have very highly distributed systems or multi-tenant systems with many different stakeholders, the key management can get quite complex. Also, if you look at machines, industrial machines, they typically have a very long lifetime. You have systems which are there for 10, 20 years or longer. So that means that also your keys have to be managed for all this time. And that again can get quite complex. Or even worse, you could have sort of legacy systems which maybe even don't have any cryptography or keys, and you cannot even install it on these machines. So what do you do then? Then you have to go to other approaches like device fingerprinting and so on. So this is again sort of authentication key is quite well established in general in IT, but in IoT security, this is not so trivial. And again, this project, one of the things it wants to contribute is sort of keep sort of what's happening in the research domain of this domain and transfer this to players that are active here. And this automatically links me, this authentication links me to one of the projects that's ongoing, and I even have two people from the project here as well, which is the TrustSource project. And TrustSource project is a cybersecurity icon project. It started in May this year, so still relatively new project. And it's specifically about how to do secure firmware updates in IoT. So, and I think results from there, I think are very interesting to know if you are generally in the IoT domain. So just for your reference, so in this project there are 5 or 6 partners depending on your account. So 3 companies, Rail, Hydroco, which is making water meters, and Quicksand, which is sort of an electronics company. And then from the research side, we have 2 or 3 groups from TLeuven, if you count. So we have our group COSIC, and then you have 2 teams from the Internet, from the computer science department. And so in this IoT, these secure firmware updates, we particularly look at 2 specific use cases that we are studying in this project. One is about trains, obviously because of the link with Rail, and the other one is about smart water meters. But of course, these results are more generally applicable as well. But these ones are the 2 that we are particularly studying. And there are multiple research challenges we are investigating in this project, like you recognize some things I mentioned before. So we're looking at IoT systems with a long lifetime. We're looking at systems which might have network constraints, where maybe your device is offline for maybe years, or is always offline, or maybe where your device has a connection but a very limited bandwidth, or systems which have severe energy constraints, like a water meter in this case. But you could have also similar things, like if you have let's say a factory where you are processing some chemical goods, sometimes we have explosive dangers, and again there you have very similar constraints. And so you cannot do whatever you want, because if you would do sort of a regular mechanism, you would even cause an explosion in your system. And so the topics we are working on are many things, but some of them which I would say are relevant here are things again like authentication, key management, end-to-end security. So and another advantage of being in both projects, I think we can be a liaison, sort of a bridge between these two projects to inform you of what's happening in these projects. And then there's another project which is, I think, is also very useful to mention. It's the IIoTS project, and it's also again a cybersecurity icon project, and this is about IoT security testing. In general, if you think, okay, how can we evaluate the security of an IoT device, there are many different options. The conventional way, okay, we give this device to security experts, and they are going to investigate it and give a report back to us and say, okay, we did our analysis and this is what we found. In some cases, we could even go further and have things like formal security evaluations, or use some tools at design time which sort of give you guarantees that you have certain security properties. Or you could say, okay, I launch my product and then I see that I get maybe reports about bugs and then I fix it on the way. That could also be a sort of evaluation. But another thing which is not often considered is, okay, what happens if a non-security expert evaluate this project? Maybe the company who's producing this is maybe not a security expert, but they still want to have some idea of their product, of how secure it is, or of some components. And that's exactly the focus of the IIoTS projects. So project started 1 year earlier than the TrustSource project, so May last year. The partners there in this project are Landsweeper, Firmlighter, and Keysight from the company's point of view. And then from the research side, we have LSEC, and then we have again COSIC and Business Group. And so I said it's really about security testing of IoT devices by non-security experts, and that's a very important part here. And so why is it important? So because we want to design, and that's really the goal of the project, to design security tools, security testing tools, which are automated or semi-automated. Because then, in the ideal world, a non-security expert can just use it, press a button, start, and doesn't have to know anything about the system or how to configure it, and the system will give you some insight. And we're not just developing these tools for fun, because they can help you to maybe prepare something like, okay, I want to be certified later, or I want to be compliant to a certain standard, and maybe you can use these tools as the first step to have an idea, or sort of to help you go in that direction. And one thing we're particularly foreseeing now in the upcoming year, I would say, is also to validate the tools we're developing. And so this is also a warm sort of outreach to everybody who's interested in using these tools or collaborating with us to evaluate these tools. We're more than happy to get some input there. So which tools are we developing? Because security testing is still a very broad domain. So actually we're developing 4 specific tools. One is about firmware analysis. So you have source code and you want to, your firmware, your source code, and you want to do static analysis on this. The second one is the implementation of a wireless network protocol. So we have a modem, by example, LTE chip in your system. And you want to know, okay, how secure is this chip? Does it have some bugs in it? So the wireless network protocol itself. The third tool we are looking at is side channel analysis. So we have some cryptographic modules or things which are processing keys, and we want to know, is this module or this software, is it securely implemented or does it really leak keys? That's the third tool we're doing. And the third one is more, if you have a system which is deployed, to do automated network scanning. To do an automated way, know which devices are actually in your network. Maybe there are some devices in your network that you're even not aware of. And these tools can help you learn what devices are there and how they really behave in your network. What are they sending? What are they doing? Yes, I think I mentioned it. So again, I think this is another project. It's an ICOM project, but again, I think this insights from this project can be useful for the broader IoT security domain as well. And that's my last slide. So if you want to have more information about this, feel free to reach out to me or to any other, or to Ulrich, because he's also aware of this project. And I'm more than happy to help you.